The meeting was supposed to remain buried behind locked palace doors. No minutes would be released, no official statement would identify Meghan, and every aide had been warned to remain silent. Yet moments after the senior royals departed, one devastating sentence escaped. No more private messages, no more informal promises, and no more using Harry as the bridge. Someone inside had heard everything and decided the public deserved to know. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. King Charles had convened the gathering at Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London headquarters, after weeks of private tension. William, Camilla, Princess Anne, and 2 senior household advisors attended. Harry and Meghan received neither an invitation nor a warning. The discussion concerned future communication with the Duchess, a title given to the wife of a duke, and whether unofficial family contact could continue without damaging the institution. Charles entered determined to preserve a personal channel to his son. The king still believed fatherhood should survive where royal trust had failed. But one advisor argued that private conversations with Harry could no longer be separated from their institutional consequences, meaning the effects those exchanges might have on palace decisions and public responsibilities. The second advisor agreed. Camilla remained guarded, while Anne warned that secrecy was placing impossible pressure on everyone involved. William sat rigidly when Meghan's name entered the discussion. The prince said nothing until Harry was described as the bridge between his marriage and family. Then he slowly pushed his chair backwards. William rejected the idea that his brother should carry private promises from one side to the other, especially when every message risked becoming evidence in the next public dispute. Anne understood his anger. Camilla understood the danger. Charles resisted. Cutting the unofficial connection could protect the crown, but it might also convince Harry that his father had abandoned him. The king's success as sovereign suddenly collided with his suffering as a parent. Then an aide standing beyond the inner doorway heard the whisper that shattered his remaining hope. If reconciliation needs secrecy to survive, then it is not reconciliation. The words were soft, but the documented account later given to a media contact showed they changed the decision immediately. The meeting ended with every future exchange involving Meghan routed through formal representatives, authorized professionals, who would record and manage official communication. Minutes later, a palace aide entered an empty corridor, unlocked a private phone, and transmitted the exact wording to a trusted journalist. The leak exposed the decision but concealed the speaker, leaving one explosive question unanswered. Because behind that single sentence stood a father afraid of losing his son, a brother exhausted by betrayal, and a woman thousands of miles away who had no idea the palace had just closed its final private door. This was not merely a meeting about communication rules. It was a collision between people carrying years of grief, wounded loyalty, and unfinished conversations. Charles feared that formality would push Harry further away. William believed informality had already cost the family too much. Meghan remained absent, yet every pause seemed shaped by her presence. As the discussion tightened, the monarchy's public crisis became painfully personal. Charles regarded the private channel as the last surviving thread between father and son. The king had continued accepting occasional messages, despite repeated advice, to establish formal boundaries rules, requiring communication to pass through authorized representatives and be recorded. To him, closing that route felt less like protection and more like surrender. If Harry could no longer speak privately to his father, then the crown had consumed one of the few relationships the monarch still hoped to save. William carried a different fear into the room. The prince wanted to protect Catherine, their children, and the future monarchy, the structure of royal responsibility that his family would eventually inherit from another cycle of private words becoming public controversy. Catherine had endured accusations without controlling when they appeared, while the children were growing old enough to feel the consequences. William believed another confidential promise could produce another crisis they would all be forced to survive. Charles finally asked, "Must everything between a father and his son become official?" His voice carried more sadness than authority. William lowered his eyes before answering that Harry remained his son, but was no longer only a private citizen. The reply wounded the king because it was true. His younger son's choices now affected the monarchy, while every attempt to preserve family intimacy risked creating fresh institutional damage. Meghan received a brief warning from Harry in California. His recorded message said palace contact might soon change, but offered no explanation. She listened twice, placed her phone face down, and wondered whether the silence meant rejection or an attempt to provoke her into responding publicly. Harry could offer no certainty. He had been given none himself, and that uncertainty placed their marriage directly inside a decision unfolding thousands of miles away. Camilla supported stronger boundaries, but warned against language that sounded punitive. The Queen feared Meghan would interpret punishment where the palace claimed protection. More deeply, she worried Charles would regret allowing official machinery to replace family conversation. Anne answered by producing a handwritten chronology, a dated record of events arranged in order. It listed attempted reconciliations, disputed messages, and broken assurances. Camilla studied the pages while the princess explained that the decision had not begun that morning. One entry stopped William. Anne had underlined the date twice, marking a private Windsor conversation as the moment concern became determination. Charles recognized it too. Whatever had occurred there had changed the prince's position and quietly prepared the palace for separation. To understand why the palace finally chose distance over another private promise, the story must return to the Windsor encounter that convinced William the old arrangement could never continue. Every royal rupture has a moment that later appears inevitable. This one began during a quiet Windsor reception, when Harry asked William for 10 minutes without secretaries, cameras, or written records. What started as a guarded conversation between brothers ended with a warning neither could forget. Within 36 hours, details known only to those inside that room crossed the Atlantic and appeared almost word for word in public discussion. Charles had spent months protecting a delicate arrangement. The king maintained personal contact with Harry, while palace officials handled public disputes separately. That separation mattered because private father and son conversations were meant to remain family exchanges, not become part of the monarchy's official response. The entire arrangement depended upon confidentiality. One leak could destroy the trust Charles still hoped might bring his younger son closer. William tolerated the channel because he believed it might eventually produce an honest conversation. Catherine encouraged patience, reminding the prince that family trust could return only through small, private steps. She understood his suspicion, but feared closing every door would make reconciliation impossible. William listened because Catherine had endured much of the controversy herself, yet still chose caution over anger. Harry approached his brother after the Windsor reception, a formal gathering hosted by the royal household, and asked to speak alone. He said Meghan wanted reassurance that she would not be publicly diminished at future family events. The Duchess feared restricted access, altered seating, or statements that might present her as unwelcome before she could respond. William promised Harry he would raise the concern discreetly. The brothers left without agreement, but with a fragile understanding that their words would remain private. 36 hours later, American media commentators discussed the substance of that exchange. William read the documented coverage beside Catherine and circled a phrase matching Harry's wording. He placed down his pen without speaking. Catherine recognized the sentence immediately because the prince had repeated it to her after the conversation. The phrase was not general speculation. It reflected language spoken only after the Windsor room had been cleared. Harry denied deliberately sharing anything. In a recorded call, he insisted several people understood the broader disagreement surrounding Meghan. William focused on one sentence no advisor had heard and asked how it could have traveled. His brother offered no answer that satisfied him. The denial preserved uncertainty, but it could not restore confidence. Catherine later told Charles that the deepest injury was no longer one headline. It was the impossibility of knowing whether any intimate exchange would remain intimate after leaving the palace. The king heard her concern, yet resisted treating suspicion as proof. William carried the marked article into Buckingham Palace, the sovereign's principal working headquarters, ready to challenge that resistance. Charles saw the circles across the page, and understood that his son had not come seeking another compromise. The whispered verdict may have been quiet, but the confrontation that produced it was anything but, because William had arrived prepared to prove why another private compromise was already impossible. For nearly 20 minutes, everyone spoke in the careful language of palace procedure. Then Charles suggested keeping one confidential line open for Harry, and William's restraint finally broke. He placed the marked Windsor article in front of his father and delivered the sentence that froze the room. "You are asking us to trust what has already broken." Nobody interrupted. Even the king seemed unprepared for the hurt behind those words. Charles proposed what he believed was a humane compromise. Official matters would pass through lawyers and secretaries, meaning authorized representatives would record exchanges involving palace decisions. Harry, however, would retain one personal route to his father for emergencies and private reconciliation. The king argued that the exception could preserve their relationship without reopening the wider dispute surrounding Meghan. William rejected the idea immediately. The prince warned that an unrecorded channel could blur personal reassurance with royal policy, the formal position guiding how the monarchy acts. A father might offer comfort, only for that comfort to be interpreted later as an institutional promise. Anne supported one consistent system. The princess insisted that rules protecting the family would fail if grief allowed exceptions whenever pressure became unbearable. Charles leaned forward and accused his eldest son of turning emotional caution into permanent exile. William answered that protecting boundaries was not the same as abandoning Harry. His brother would remain family, but family connection could no longer grant private access to decisions affecting everyone. The words struck hard, because the future king was separating love from trust, and admitting that one had survived while the other had not. The king tightened his hand around his glasses when William invoked Catherine and their children. The prince said his wife had endured private discussions becoming public conflict, while the children now lived close enough to the consequences to feel them. Catherine deserved certainty. Their children deserved protection. Charles looked wounded, and his son struggled to prevent anger at past damage from becoming an attack on his father. Camilla intervened before the confrontation broke completely. The Queen warned that Meghan's name could not become a substitute for confronting the fracture between the brothers. Blaming the Duchess for every failure might feel simple, she said, but it would not explain why Harry and William no longer trusted each other. Camilla's challenge briefly shifted the room from accusation toward responsibility. Anne opened her handwritten chronology and read its final documented line. "Every exception has produced another dispute." The princess then listed the private assurances, disputed interpretations, and public consequences supporting that conclusion. Charles removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. He stopped defending the confidential channel, yet silence from the sovereign did not create a binding rule. That power rested with the officials controlling access, records, and royal communication, and they were waiting beyond the closed doors. Once the king fell silent, the question was no longer whether the family felt betrayed, it was who possessed the power to turn that pain into an irreversible palace rule. Royal power does not always announce itself with a command. Sometimes it appears as a folder placed on polished wood, a signature added beneath formal language, or a secretary quietly removing a telephone number from an access list. As the family wrestled with grief and loyalty, two advisors transformed their emotions into policy. Their proposal contained no accusation against Meghan, but its consequences reached directly into her relationship with the crown. The private secretary presented the communication protocol first. That senior advisor manages the sovereign's official business, while the protocol was a written set of rules determining how future contact would be handled. Every exchange involving royal events, security, titles, or family appearances would pass through designated representatives and leave a written record. Private messages could continue only when they carried no request, promise, or implied decision. The Lord Chamberlain's office gave the proposal its operational force. That department manages ceremonial arrangements, invitations, accreditation, household access, and official information. Once its officials joined the private secretary's team, informal exceptions became almost impossible to preserve. One office would record the communication. The other would control whether its request could become action. Together, the advisors could close doors without publicly declaring anyone unwelcome. Charles read the first page slowly. The king stopped at the phrase, "No personal assurance shall constitute institutional consent." In plain language, his compassionate words to Harry could no longer be treated as commitments made by the palace. Charles understood the protection it offered, but he also felt its cruelty. Even as a father, he would have to measure comfort against the risk that comfort might later be presented as royal approval. William felt relief, yet no triumph followed. The prince rubbed the edge of the Windsor article with his thumb and recognized the price of the boundary he had demanded. The rule might protect Catherine and their children from another disputed promise, but it would also deepen Harry's isolation. William had succeeded in defending his household while suffering the knowledge that his brother would experience that defense as rejection. Anne requested one critical addition before accepting the document. Every message, the princess insisted, must receive a recorded response. Silence could not later be described as hostility, approval, or secret negotiation. Anne's amendment protected both sides by removing the dangerous space where assumptions had repeatedly grown into accusations. The protocol never banned Meghan from future royal occasions. It ended private negotiation instead. The Duchess could no longer seek advance reassurance through Harry before formal decisions were reached, while he could no longer carry informal promises between California and the Crown. When the notification was transmitted, the palace expected anger from the prince. Harry reacted immediately. Meghan did not. She read every sentence, asked for a copy, and made one quiet decision no advisor had predicted. The palace believed it had created clarity, but when Harry opened the formal notification beside Meghan, the language of order landed with the force of a personal expulsion. Harry read the notice once as a prince familiar with palace language, then again as a son searching desperately for his father inside it. The second reading hurt more. Every sentence was polite, every instruction precise, and nowhere did the message say that Charles wished to end their relationship. Yet the meaning felt unmistakable. Whatever remained between father and son would now pass through people paid to keep emotion under control. The notice explained that Harry, a prince by birth as the monarch's son, must submit future questions through approved royal offices. Discussions involving official events, security arrangements, family attendance, or public statements would require formal written communication, recorded exchanges handled by authorized representatives. No private promise could replace that process, and no personal reassurance from Charles could be interpreted as a decision made by the Crown. One sentence preserved emergency family contact. It did not, however, offer Harry an unrestricted route to his father. The distinction appeared compassionate because it prevented complete separation, yet felt painfully distant because someone else would determine when the emergency justified access. Charles had not formally rejected his son. The king had allowed a system to stand between them, which made the loss harder to name and almost impossible to challenge. Harry paced across the room and called the decision punishment, disguised as administration. Meghan remained seated, watching him move between fury at the palace and longing for his father. The Duchess understood that his anger came from grief. He wanted to condemn Charles, but he also wanted the king to call and prove the document did not represent his heart. Meghan opened a drafted message addressed to Charles. She had written it before the notification arrived, hoping to request reassurance about future family contact. After reading it once, she deleted every word. She told Harry she would not ask for acceptance through a door that had already been closed. The decision sounded controlled, but its restraint carried more finality than anger. The leak created another danger. Meghan knew the whispered verdict would publicly define her as the cause of the restrictions, even though the protocol reflected years of conflict among Harry, William, and Charles. She expected headlines to reduce a broken family to one convenient villain. Harry began preparing an angry response, determined to expose what the notice felt like. Meghan stopped him before he sent it. Her refusal to retaliate disrupted the palace's expectation of an immediate public counterattack. Silence denied royal advisors the confrontation they had prepared to manage. More importantly, it forced Harry to decide whether he wanted another public battle or an honest answer. Later that night, Harry contacted William directly. He approached him not as a duke, a senior royal title he retained, but as a brother, asking one final personal question. William answered, and neither man had advisors beside him. With advisors removed and Meghan choosing silence, the crisis narrowed to two brothers, one private call, and the question neither had been brave enough to ask face to face. The call began without greetings. Harry asked whether William had wanted him cut off from their father, and for several seconds the prince said nothing. There were no courtiers preparing answers, no spouses speaking for either man, and no officials recording the exchange. What remained was uncomfortable and painfully simple. Two brothers grieving the trust they once possessed, each convinced the other had abandoned it first. Harry had used an old private number that survived repeated changes of staff and security. William answered personally, knowing the conversation existed outside formal palace channels. The prince, a royal title held by a monarch's son, understood the risk immediately. Yet he stayed on the line because refusing to answer would turn a protective boundary into the personal rejection his brother feared it had already become. William established one condition: the call would concern only their relationship. Neither brother would make promises about invitations, titles, media responses, security, or official access. Those matters would remain under the new protocol, the written system requiring royal communication to pass through authorized representatives. Harry agreed, though accepting the restriction meant admitting that brotherhood could no longer unlock every palace door. Harry then asked whether Meghan had been named as the family's enemy. William answered carefully. Her name had dominated the meeting, but the final decision concerned a broken system of trust affecting everyone. The prince refused to make the Duchess solely responsible for years of disputed messages, public accusations, and private suspicion. Still, he would not pretend Meghan's role had been irrelevant. William admitted that the Windsor disclosure had left Catherine feeling exposed. His wife had encouraged patience because she believed small private exchanges could rebuild trust. Watching language from that conversation appear in public commentary made Catherine question whether her restraint had merely created another vulnerability. Harry did not challenge her pain. He said quietly that he understood why the damage could not be erased through another assurance. The silence that followed carried years of unfinished anger. William finally repeated the exact whispered sentence from the meeting. If reconciliation needs secrecy to survive, then it is not reconciliation. He acknowledged supporting it. Harry absorbed the admission without ending the call. The words wounded him, yet their honesty offered something palace statements never had: a clear answer delivered without disguise. The brothers reached one narrow agreement. Official contact would remain formal, but neither man would use the protocol as proof that their personal bond was permanently dead. Harry would not call the arrangement complete exile. William would not describe distance as final separation. They had not restored trust, but they stopped declaring it impossible. Their understanding remained private, while the leaked account continued traveling. A newspaper had already selected an image and prepared a headline that would place Meghan at the center of the rupture. Before dawn, the brothers had found a fragile distinction between family and institution, but outside the palace, that nuance was about to vanish beneath a headline designed to wound. By morning, the private whisper had become a public verdict. Broadcasters debated every word, commentators assigned blame, and crowds outside Buckingham Palace stared at their phones as though witnessing another royal separation in real time. Yet one front page captured the cruelty of the moment more powerfully than any televised argument. It showed Meghan alone beneath a black headline. The palace closes its last private door. International coverage described the new protocol as Meghan's formal exclusion. The protocol, a written system controlling how sensitive communication would be recorded and answered, did nothing of the kind. It neither banned her from Britain nor prevented invitations to family occasions. Yet Buckingham Palace, the monarch's principal working headquarters, had failed to explain that distinction before the leaked sentence shaped the story. Palace officials released a restrained clarification. The arrangements applied only to institutional matters, meaning decisions involving royal duties, security, public appearances, and official authority. Private family contact remained possible whenever individuals freely chose it. The statement was accurate, but accuracy struggled against a headline built to transform boundaries into banishment and restraint into revenge. Charles watched a broadcaster describe the decision as a father rejecting his son. The king muted the television and told an aide that the policy had protected the crown, the monarchy, as a continuing public institution while making his grief resemble cruelty. Charles had preserved order, yet the world now saw abandonment. His authority appeared firm precisely when his heart felt most powerless. Meghan discovered the front page on a tablet. She refused to release an emotional response, even as Harry sat beside her, furious at the distortion. The Duke wanted to expose how the headline twisted a communication rule into personal expulsion. Meghan stopped him. Answering outrage with outrage, she insisted, would repeat the cycle that had brought them there. Harry remained angry, but respected her silence. Outside the palace, the public divide became impossible to ignore. One woman raised a handwritten sign declaring, "Boundaries are not banishment." Nearby, another person shouted that the monarchy had chosen control over reconciliation. Both reactions contained part of the truth. The rule protected vulnerable conversations, but it also proved how little trust remained between people who once spoke without officials standing between them. William authorized a clearer palace line through a documented statement. Meghan had not been erased. Harry had not been disowned. The new rules existed because undocumented communication had repeatedly intensified private conflict. The prince knew the clarification could not repair every wound, but it prevented silence from hardening into a false official verdict. The frenzy slowly weakened. Retaliation had been avoided, and the distortion had been challenged. What remained was harder than any headline, deciding whether the boundary marked the death of reconciliation or its first honest condition. The noise finally began to recede, leaving Charles, William, Harry, and Meghan to confront what the leaked whisper had truly taken from them and what it had unexpectedly preserved. The leak did not expose a secret campaign to erase Meghan. It exposed a family that had confused private affection with institutional permission, until neither could survive the pressure. The palace closed an informal channel because every exception had become another source of suspicion. That decision wounded Harry, hardened William, saddened Charles, and isolated Meghan, but it also ended the ambiguity that had kept all four trapped inside the same destructive pattern. The final protocol remained firmly in place. That protocol, a written system governing sensitive communication, required official royal matters to be documented, answered consistently, and handled through authorized representatives. No hidden promise could override a formal decision. Silence could no longer be presented as approval, rejection, or secret negotiation. The rule mattered because uncertainty had repeatedly allowed private emotion to become public conflict. Personal relationships remained deliberately outside that system. Charles retained the freedom to speak with Harry as a father, provided their conversation created no commitment involving titles, ceremonies, security, or palace policy. William could also choose whether and when to rebuild contact as a brother. The prince was no longer required to trust automatically, but neither did the arrangement demand permanent estrangement. Charles tested that distinction through a short personal message sent directly to his younger son. The king discussed no royal event, title, or official decision. He wrote only, "You remain my son. That has not changed." Harry read the message aloud to Meghan, then answered without consulting an advisor. His reply offered no accusation. He simply told his father that he remained his son and wanted their next conversation to belong only to them. Meghan chose restraint over retaliation. The Duchess issued no attack, claimed no victory, and refused to present herself as defeated. She accepted that access was not the same as belonging, just as proximity to the royal family could not guarantee trust. Reconciliation could not be demanded through private pressure or public outrage. For Meghan, that truth carried sadness, but it also ended the exhausting struggle to extract certainty from unofficial promises. William returned to the marked Windsor article and placed it inside a drawer, rather than the official file, a permanent record used to preserve palace decisions. The future king understood that its evidence had served its purpose. He would maintain the boundary protecting Catherine and their children, but he would not carry the grievance as a weapon against Harry. The leak embarrassed the palace, yet forced a vital clarification through documented statements. Meghan had not been barred. Harry had not been disowned. The monarchy would simply no longer allow family intimacy to function as unofficial policy. Nobody had won, and nobody escaped wounded. Love had finally been separated from royal authority. The palace door to informal influence had closed for good, yet the human door remained unlocked, and that distinction transformed a cruel public leak into the first truthful boundary this wounded family had established in years. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.